Welcome to From Betrayal to Breakthrough. I'm Dr. Debbie Silber, and today's guest is Dr. Joan Rosenberg. And Dr. Joan Rosenberg, a cutting-edge psychologist known as an innovative thinker, acclaimed speaker and trainer, is a two-time TEDx speaker and member of the Association of Transformational Leaders. She's been recognized for her thought leadership and influence in personal development and has been featured in the documentaries I Am, The Miracle Mindset, Pursuing Happiness, and The Hidden Epidemic. Dr. Rosenberg has appeared on CNN's American Morning, the OWN Network, and PBS, as well as appearances and radio interviews in all of the major metropolitan markets. A California licensed psychologist, Dr. Rosenberg speaks on how to build confidence, emotional strength, resilience, achieving emotional, conversational, and relationship mastery, integrating neuroscience and psychotherapy, and suicide prevention. An Air Force veteran, she is a professor of graduate psychology at Pepperdine University in Los Angeles, California. Her book, 90 Seconds to a Life You Love, is out. And you're about to meet my friend, Dr. Joan Rosenberg, who's going to be talking about ways we can lead a confident, resilient, and authentic life you love. And that's so important, especially after an experience with betrayal. How do you regain that confidence and move through those feelings so you can heal? There's actually a formula, the Rosenburg Reset, and you're going to learn exactly what that is. Here's Dr. Joan. Okay, I am just so excited for my guest today because we have Dr. Joan Rosenberg, and you're going to hear how wonderful she is and all the incredible things that she's up to, but she has such a special place in my heart for another reason. You know, I talk about the study and how it led to this just entirely new business and life and all of these wonderful things. Well, Dr. Joan was one of my committee members, and to be completely honest, she was brutal in the best kind of way, because each time I went back to do more, I learned so much more, and it actually created something that by the time we were done, I'm truly proud of. So I'm grateful. It wasn't easy, but I am totally grateful. And welcome, Dr. Joan.
Well, thank you, Dr. Debbie. That's so funny. Or not.
Yeah, it wasn't funny at the time. But the truth is, when every revision, it truly uncovered something so incredible and so exciting. And I am glad that we didn't go with that first revision, although it would have been easy. You know, I had this saying, easy now, hard later. Hard now, easy later. Take your pick. It's going to be one of those two.
That's true. That's very true.
No matter what the situation is. And this was a case of hard now, I guess easy later. So, but I'm grateful for the study. I'm grateful for you and your participation in it. So
thank you.
You have just the most wonderful book that I listen to. I do a lot of Audible, and I listen to it. And of course, I want to talk about that. But let's talk about confidence, because everybody listening has been affected. Their confidence has been affected. That is just something so common to betrayal. Whether it's the betrayal of a family member, partner, friend, coworker, our confidence is affected. So let's start with confidence, and how would you help someone whose confidence is affected by a betrayal experience?
That's actually a great start. And you're right. Confidence does take a hit, but I have to kind of form my thinking around that a little bit, because we're by and large we're talking about how one builds confidence. We're not. I haven't really talked about it when you've got confidence and then it's been shaken. So, but. And kind of upset where your balance has been so upset. But the way I think about confidence now is that confidence is the deep sense that you can handle the emotional outcome of whatever you face or whatever you pursue. So it's not, and other people look at it in other ways, but that's really my definition for it at this point. Or it's an embodied sense, if you will, of can-do-itiveness.
Mm-hmm. And I found in my experience, it seems, and from the people that I work with, when your confidence does take a hit, and when these situations like betrayal happen, for us eventually, but in the beginning we
Right.
feel they happen to us. It is an opportunity to rebuild confidence, and it is those things that do make us stronger. Do you find that?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And when one is able to hold the point of view that every life experience is a learning opportunity, and that even the hardest things or what feel the most damaging is something to learn from, then you can move through it.
Mm-hmm.
And that again, and holding that kind of an attitude makes a huge difference from my point of view in terms of resilience. That those kinds of attitudes help you bounce back.
Mm-hmm.
So when I think part of what you're addressing with the betrayal too, and with when that confidence has been shaken, is that there may have been a trust in oneself, and a trust that one could face the emotional outcome of whatever one has to deal with, but in a situation where betrayals occurred, then there's a loss of trust in one's own perception of reality. It's like, I was living this reality and I could face everything at this level of reality. It's like, what? There's a different level of reality that's actually been taking place and I missed it, right? So that I think that's also a piece that shakes it up. And it's like a regrounding. It's like, well, then what is reality? And if that's not reality, then how can I trust me and trust my own ability to face these things?
Absolutely.
So I think that's some of what takes place when betrayals occur and why it seems to shake up the confidence.
And trust is a huge word when it comes to betrayal. And that was one thing that we saw in the study. We don't trust our betrayer. We certainly don't trust ourselves. And that's a scary place to live.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, what's interesting to me around trust, I mean, I do think I talk about this in the book, is that I think of trust many times, and I as not a between experience. And I know we talk about not trusting people. So let me talk about it from both angles, from the trust that relates to oneself, and then this idea of trust between. And I have to find a better word for the between connection, but if you think about how trust gets used, well, I don't trust that person anymore. And you look up the word trust, belief is actually in the dictionary. So when you're saying I don't trust that person or I do trust that person, what you're saying is either I do believe or I don't believe that person.
Right.
And if we change that language and actually stop using the word trust because there's this vague qualities to it, and we start using the word believe, it actually makes more sense.
And it really does. That's so interesting because it's really true. And that's a hard thing to say to somebody. I don't believe you. Right.
Yeah. But it's often the truth, the underlying truth of what's being spoken when you go, well, I don't trust you. And then it was, well, how come you don't trust me? But if they said, well, I don't believe you, then it would be a whole different experience. You're actually not believable to me.
Right. And that does,
right?
It resonates at a very different level. That feels very different.
Yes. So that's, well, go ahead. That's the trust between. I can go to the trust internally.
Let's do that. Yeah.
Okay. So the trust between, I think we should change the language and we should change it to believe. I either don't believe you or I do believe you. Mm-hmm. For then if I look at the trust from an internal standpoint, then it's I trust me, meaning I trust my ability to experience and move through the 8 unpleasant feelings that I talk about in the book.
And can you let's just talk about them? Can you talk about the 8 unpleasant feelings?
Sure. The whole book is centered around one's ability to experience and move through 8 unpleasant feelings, and then it's how those get applied to solving a whole bunch of common psychological challenges, like worrying about what other people think of you, or anxiety, or difficulty speaking up. But the 8 unpleasant feelings are sadness, or I should say feeling states: sadness, shame, helplessness, anger, vulnerability, embarrassment, disappointment, and frustration.
And just in those those 8 words, I picture someone who's been betrayed and they're shaking their head like, yep, that's how I feel.
Correct. Yes.
And what do they? Yeah, all of them. So what do they do? How do you move through, or is it important to identify what feelings they're feeling at the time, and then what do they do with them? What would be like a first step?
The first step for me, it comes out in a formula that a colleague called the Rosenburg Reset, and so I just borrowed the term, and so the reset is 1 choice, 8 feelings, 90 seconds. So let me do as quick a walkthrough on that as I can. The 1 choice is awareness. So it's being aware of and in touch with as much of your moment-to-moment experience as possible. So that means you don't want to be doing things like engaging in social media or shopping or food or whatever it is that you might use, or substances to have you check out and move away from what's really going on. So the 1 choice, awareness. Be present. The second is the 8 feelings, which I just named. And why these 8 feelings? Because they're the most common, everyday, in the moment reactions to everyday life experiences. And those reactions in particular occur when we don't get what we need or what we want. Mm-hmm. Everyday stuff, right? So I'm not talking about things that are traumatic or tragic. And a betrayal could be potentially that, mm-hmm. But oftentimes they're profoundly disappointing and profoundly sad experiences. Or profoundly angering experiences, but not necessarily tragic or traumatic. Mm-hmm. Could be, but go ahead.
And I remember in the book, there were so many scenarios that you gave from patients and students where I thought you were going to label it as one emotion, and it actually wasn't.
And okay, like such as?
Well, like something was... Let's say it looked like anger, but it was really vulnerability. Something like that. And I just found it so interesting because I guess we look at the outward emotion or the emotion we first express, but it's sort of like what's behind that is the real emotion. Yeah. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, well, I mean, anxiety would be an example of that. Because most people use people use the word fear, which I think is both fear and anxiety in my world are both misused and overused. Mm-hmm. Fear is danger in the moment or life threat in the moment right now. Most of us, when we use the word fear, are not experiencing that. There's no lion or tiger chasing us, right? Mm-hmm. So I would say stop using that word because you actually activate the bodily correlate of that. So the next most obvious would be anxiety. But anxiety is really vague. If I were to look at people, and anxiety makes sense in this context, but it's the diffuse apprehension of the future, kind of anticipating a negative event, and I would say, and then a negative outcome, and then the unpleasant feelings that follow. But anxiety is way too vague. If I asked 15 people what it meant, I'd get probably 15 different answers. Mm-hmm. So then I started asking people what's underneath that. And invariably, I came up with 1 or more of the 8 feelings. And so, if you think about anxiety, then the next most obvious is vulnerability, mm-hmm. which means I could be hurt. There's this quality that we're feeling or sensing that I could be hurt, and I think that that's a much more accurate term.
Right, and vulnerability is just so terrifying for so many people. Like, how does somebody identify that it is vulnerability that's at the root of whatever is getting them, and what do they do about it? Is there something you can move through?
That's yes, and that's the other part of the 90 seconds too. We got a little wandering there. Yes, there is a way to move through it, and here is the absolute key to vulnerability. You notice vulnerability when you describe yourself as feeling anxious, mm-hmm. then or fearful. The first thing I would say, fearful, go to anxiety. Anxiety, your next step is, am I feeling vulnerable? Do I have the sense or the quality that I could be hurt in this moment? Then you're feeling vulnerable, or that I'm afraid I might be embarrassed. Mm-hmm. You're probably going at those points, because vulnerability and embarrassment tend to go together. Then that's probably what's going on. But here is the key to vulnerability. If you know that you can experience and move through the other 7 feelings that I named, mm-hmm. then you can handle vulnerability. Because the outcome of vulnerability, when things don't work out, being put in a position to have to deal with one or more of those those other seven feelings.
So does that mean vulnerability is sort of the biggest of the emotions, or the most challenging?
I wouldn't say it's the biggest. I would say it's the most unique.
Mm-hmm.
It's because it intersects with the other seven,
Right.
in just unique ways. So
And
go ahead.
I can see that, because I'll tell you, there are I've experienced every emotion, and I'm sure everybody listening has, that you mentioned, but there's something about vulnerability that is just terrifying. But on the other side of that, there's it seems like there's freedom, there's pride, you have a sense of courage. I mean, I'll never forget the first time I started sharing about my betrayal.
Right.
And it was absolutely terrifying because of the thought of being vulnerable.
Right, being what? Embarrassed.
And I guess that's it. It was at first it was embarrassed, but just exposing myself like that and being that, like, okay, this is what I have to share.
Right.
And it was terrifying.
Yeah, but what did anything bad really happen?
No.
Of course not.
Not at all.
What ended up happening is that people saw you more accessible and probably wanted to get closer to you, and then they wanted to share their stories of how they'd been betrayed.
Mm-hmm.
So what it does when we're vulnerable and we're genuine in those ways, and we allow ourselves to lean into and choose into vulnerability, then what ends up happening is that we not only do we get more connected to ourselves, not only do we feel more liberated, not only do we feel more emotionally strong, we establish deeper connections with others as well.
So it's such a wonderful outcome, but then the situations come up where we're considering it, and it's just the fear seems too great. What do we do in that scenario?
I will tell you, don't use the word fear. So I get really dialed into language.
Uh-huh.
So I would take the word fear away from you.
Okay.
It's just like, I'm just feeling vulnerable. Okay. I recognize I could get hurt if I do X. And I'll come back to what I said a moment ago. What you have to do is you have to remind yourself that you have the capacity to experience and move through those other 7 feelings, then you've got this. Taking a risk. We don't get afraid of taking the risk itself. Mm-hmm. What we get afraid of is the emotional outcome of taking the risk.
Mm-hmm. Right.
But if we know we can handle the emotional outcome before we even go for it, then go pursue, go do whatever it is that you want to do.
And how do we know we can handle the emotional outcome? Let's say we haven't done or said or ventured into that. It's that unknown space.
Okay, so the first thing I would say is, if you're an adult, then you've probably experienced a whole variety of disappointments and things that made you sad and things that made you angry or embarrassed you or frustrated you. And if you're still living and breathing and listening to this right now, then you already know how to do it.
So we've already mastered it at some
level. But if you want to do it in a more conscious way, then let me give you the rest of that formula, which is the 90 seconds piece. So we've got you're choosing into awareness. You've got the 8 feelings, that are at the heart of so much of what we do. And then the last part of it is this idea of 90 seconds. So I wrestled, Debbie, with understanding what it was that made it so difficult for most of us to tolerate or move through those unpleasant feelings generally. Mm-hmm. And neuroscience findings opened up in the late 90s and well into the 2000s and up to now. And what the neuroscientists tend to talk about is that most of us come to know what we're feeling emotionally through bodily sensation, or by how we feel it in our body first. Mm-hmm. So think embarrassment, the heat and the redness at the chest and coming up into the face, right? Bright red, whatever. Others see the bright redness, you feel the heat. That's bodily sensation. Or you feel kind of a drop down sensation at your chest. And that's for sadness or disappointment. Or closed fists and tight jaw and heat at the back of the neck or arms for anger, right? But the thing is, it's unique to every one of us. So I'm just giving suggestions of what it could be. But what dawned on me is that it's not that we don't want to feel the whole range of what we feel. I believe we do, because it's an experience of aliveness to be able to experience both pleasant and unpleasant feelings. But it's the bodily sensation that we don't want to experience that makes it so uncomfortable. And that's why we back away from unpleasant feelings.
That's so interesting. So just to, if I'm getting this right, it's not necessarily the feelings, it's that feeling of discomfort, the physical feeling of discomfort.
The physical sensation that lets you know what you're feeling emotionally is the very thing we want to avoid. And that's why people back away from unpleasant feelings.
Wow. So really what would serve everyone, I'm thinking, is to identify what are the feelings that they feel, the physical feelings they feel in each of these emotions, so that it's not so unfamiliar.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes. In fact, there's a chart, what I call an how, what, where exercise in the book that I walk people through, so that literally you can sit down, kind of close your eyes and walk yourself through each of the 8 emotional feelings, so that you can find your own bodily sensations that kind of correlate with those feeling words.
Wonderful.
And so the other part of it then is that I want people to be able to ride the bodily sensation waves with an understanding from Dr. Jill Bolte Taylor that each feeling wave, and we're talking not about one wave, we're talking about one or more waves, bodily sensation waves, that what you need to move through is one or more bodily sensation, not one or more 90-second, up to 90-second bodily sensation waves that let you know what you're feeling emotionally.
Now, what happens within those 90 seconds? Why is it 90 seconds?
It's 90 seconds. What ends up happening is that when a feeling gets triggered, then that feeling creates kind of a rush of biochemicals into the bloodstream. And those biochemicals actually activate the bodily sensation. So if we go back to embarrassment, it's that intense rush of biochemicals in the bloodstream that creates the heat and the redness, right? And for embarrassment, and they tend to dissipate or flush out of the bloodstream in kind of an upper range of about 90 seconds. So if you know that any given feeling is short-lived, then all you got to do is ride one or more 90-second waves of those bodily sensations. And most people will go, well, I can do 90 seconds. It's like, yes, you can. And now you can stay present to what's really going on.
And what keeps it going for longer than 90 seconds? Is it because we're not aware, we're not acknowledging it?
That's a great question. Because that's the kind of the next most obvious. Is like, yeah, but my feelings have lasted for years. It's like, no, your feelings haven't lasted for years. Your memories have lasted for years. But what ends up happening is that every time you recall a given thought, or anytime you recall a given memory, that memory is going to pull everything that's associated with it, including the feelings you had at the time. So you reactivate an approximate firing off of the same sensation. So then it feels like it's just lasted for a very long time.
Right. So now what would you say to somebody who says, well, I already did this work to heal, and I feel like if I give in to this, like there's some viewing as giving into it or indulging in this, I'm sitting back in it and I'm trying to move forward?
A couple of different things. The one is, let me go one other thing, and then I'm going to turn right around and answer your question. Another thing that keeps feeling seeming like they're lingering is when we actually try not to experience them. So if we go, well, I'm not going to think about that. It's like, good luck with that. You have to think about the thing in order to not do that. So if I told you not to think of a zebra with yellow and black stripes,
that's all I'm looking at.
Right. You can't. So you can't do it. So what they call thought suppression also keeps feelings kind of lingering. But in answer to your question, in terms of if I bring that up and I'm starting to think about it again, and I'm afraid of indulging myself, I would say anytime you start to think about that kind of stuff, it's in an effort to get some resolve to it. And I want to talk about that, especially in light of this idea of betrayal, in a particular way, because with betrayal, what we eventually come down to is realizing that we cannot undo what was done, and we cannot do what was undone.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So in situations, we can't undo the knowledge about the betrayal. We can't undo the effects of the betrayal. And many times what ends up happening is that we're left with feelings of helplessness. And that's hard. That's really, really hard. And then all the sadness and everything else that comes with it. But that if we don't stop and again, I think we come back to trying to think about it, this indulging that you're talking about, is my goal would be take some time then to, try to make sense of what's taken place. Mm-hmm. Now, same thing, many times we cannot make sense of something that is senseless, mm-hmm. right? Mm-hmm. So just know you can't always, in quotes, make sense of that. But what you can make sense of is the meaning and the impact that it's had on your life.
Beautiful. And I can't help but think that brings up an element of grieving.
Yes.
And I know you've done 2 TED Talks, TEDx's, and I know one of them was about that. Can you just briefly talk a little bit about the grieving process as it relates to maybe the loss of what you expected, the loss of a relationship, just loss? Yeah,
well, I talk about the TED Talk that I did. It's it's kind of nuanced. It's what I call disguised grief. So if you're a person that is describing that you're still bitter, or you hold grudges, or you're resentful, or you want to get revenge, or you're cynical, or every bit of that I think of as disguised grief. Mm. And in the book, I talk about probably 14 or 15 different grief, what I call grief signal words, that underneath those words is actually the grief. And another way to look at it, so also disguised grief, is grieving over what we got and didn't deserve. We got the betrayal. We didn't deserve that, mm-hmm, right? Mm-hmm. Or it could be stuff that goes back to earlier childhood. Or there were betrayals in early childhood. So we got what we didn't deserve, or grieving over what we deserved and didn't get. Mm-hmm. That's the good stuff. Mm-hmm. Or grieving over what never was, grieving over what is not now, a life you imagined, right? And grieving over what may never be. So it's all of that. It certainly ties in directly to betrayal.
Absolutely. And I recommend everybody watch that TED Talk. There was something else I noticed about the book, Dr. Joan.
Please.
I listened to every single word, and you used the word "but" one time.
Is that right? Really?
Was that intentional?
Yes. Really, just once.
One time at the very end. And it made me so aware of my language, because I say "but" all the time. Uh-huh. Can you just...
No, yeah, that's too funny. Who knows what people will notice from the book. Yes, it was very intentional. Buts often negate what follows. So I do my best to not use the word "but," and it's the goal that I want. And I said this at some point in the book, that we don't live in an either or world. We live in a both and world. Mm-hmm. So when I was writing, I was also paying attention to making sure that I was using ands as opposed to using buts.
You did a great job of it, because it became so obvious that I was listening for it. I was like, and not a one, except at the very, very end. And I just had to ask, because it was
intentional.
It wasn't a short read, and here it was, an entire book with not one but, except at the very end. So kudos for that one.
Oh, wow! I have to go back and read the doggone
you
thing.
do. Well, you don't have to. I'm telling you right there. There's only one but in the very end, and. So what do you want to make sure everyone knows before we wrap up?
I want to make sure that everyone knows that if you can experience and move through those 8 unpleasant feelings, not only do they form the basis of confidence, but they really allow you to have a sense of liberating your world and you being able to have a greater sense of choice and an ability to experience life with a far greater sense of aliveness.
Oh, that's wonderful. And where do we learn more about you? Where can we find the book?
You can find the book if bricks and mortar. If you're in the Southeast, it might be Books A Million. It might be actually a number of smaller bookstores are carrying it, I'm told. And online, so Barnes & Noble, clearly Books A Million, online anywhere, pretty much, and wherever your favorite place to shop is. And then you can go to drjoanrosenberg.com, and that's Rosenberg spelled with a B-E-R-G. And I'm on social media. Everywhere social media is pretty much Dr. Joan Rosenberg. And there's 2 TED Talks. I'm writing for Psychology Today. So I can be found kind of in lots of places.
Everywhere. And we are so glad that you are. Dr. Rosenberg, it has been such an amazing pleasure. And I'll tell you, everybody, this is not one of those books that it's like, oh, maybe I'll get to it. No. This needs to be on your bookshelf, in your library. It's an important read. And I know it took you years to put this together, just to get all of the research and all the case studies and all of it together. And I'm so glad you did. It's a game changer. And you certainly helped me in my life. And I'm sure everybody listening is getting just so much out of this. So thank you so much. I love how practical Dr. Joan's ideas are and how if we're just willing to tolerate those physical feelings that are associated with those unpleasant emotions, they'll move through us and pass. Kind of reminds me of when I was pregnant and having contractions. As they begin, you know it's only a short amount of time until they peak, then pass. Not exactly the same thing, but similar. If you're willing to ride that uncomfortable wave, it'll pass too. And on the other side of that is healing. Stay in touch with Dr. Joan by heading over to drjoanrosenberg.com, and we'll have all of her information in the show notes at pbtinstitute.com/podcast. Here's my biggest takeaway. Negative emotions follow us like a shadow until and unless we're willing to tolerate that negative emotion long enough for it to pass. We give it way too much power when we try not to think about it or we try to ignore it. It's worth giving it the 90 seconds it needs so we move through it, make sense and meaning out of it, and Dr. Joan's book shows us exactly how to do that, so be sure to grab your copy. And when those emotions are lingering for too long, they can turn into physical, mental, and emotional symptoms. Take the quiz to see what symptoms are lingering. Just go to pbtinstitute.com/quiz. And let us support you. Go to Facebook and join our group, Women Hacking Betrayal, where we give information, tools, and support to help you move forward and heal once and for all. Can't wait to be with you next time. And here's to your breakthrough.